Welcome everybody in person here at the Humanities Quadrangle at Yale University in the History Department. And welcome out there to our live streaming audience, which we know is a significant number from all those of you who signed up, including a friend of Richard's in Kingston, Jamaica. I'm David Blight. I'm the director of the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery and Abolition. One of the, what are we called? Series editors, I think, with Yale University Press on a brand new series called Black Lives. Black Lives is in part modeled on a very successful series that Yale University Press has conducted for many years now called Jewish Lives. I forget the number of books that have come out in that series. It's pushing into 60, 70, or 80 volumes, I believe. The first two books in this new series, which are short biographies of African Americans, Africans, the category of Black Lives is very broad, including even characters from fiction and drama, about whom or which we have people writing biographies. For example, there will be one on Othello. There will be one on Jim in Huckleberry Finn, etc. But many other real people as well. The first two books in the series are, which I believe are published literally this week. Catherine Mooney, I'm proud to say a former student of mine, a biography of Isaac Murphy called The Rise and Fall of a Black Jockey. Isaac Murphy was the most famous jockey in the 19th century for sure. He won two of the first three Kentucky Derbies. His life is an incredible story, a tragic story. That comes out in Derby week, why not? And Catherine apparently is being interviewed on every horse show there is, which is great news. But the other one is by my old friend here, Richard Blackett, on Samuel Ringgold Ward, A Life in Struggle. I would say the third to come out is, I think, the summer or fall? January, okay. It's by Ray Arsenault and it's on John Lewis. So the series, my co-series editors are Henry Louis Gates, Jr., and Jackie Goldsmith, my colleague here at Yale. And I want to introduce, for those in the room and even everyone out there, two of the editors at Yale Press are here, Seth Ditchick, who launched this series with us, and our new editor for the Black Lives series, among other jobs she has at Yale Press, is Jesse Kindig. They're both here. There are also other representatives of Yale Press who are here, and welcome, welcome. And we have books in the back. I'm going to sell your book here.
Good riddance.
Yeah. Again, thank you all for coming. I've introduced Richard a number of times. I've told a lot of stories about Richard. I think I have a new one.
You do?
Yeah, I do.
Clean it up.
Yeah. If we're honest, you're older than me, so I can get away with this.
Yes.
I think we met 43 years ago. At the very first academic paper I ever gave. And he was in the audience. And I think I've said that before when I've introduced Richard, but he came up afterward and said something like, "Not bad, mate." I took that as positive, I think. It was on James McCune Smith. And this man, at that point, was in the process of making himself into the most important scholar of Black abolitionism I think we've ever had. And he knew everything about James McCune Smith, and it took a while before he told me that. But we do go back a long way. I was in graduate school when I met Richard. And if you wanted to delve into the stories of Black abolitionism generally, Atlantic abolitionism generally, and particularly Black abolitionists, you had to start reading Blackett. Now, Richard was born and raised in Trinidad. He went to England for his higher education. He did his graduate work at the University of Manchester. He has taught at the University of Pittsburgh, which is, I think where you were when we first met, then at Indiana University for quite a long time, and then at the University of Houston, and most recently at Vanderbilt. At Vanderbilt, I can never resist this. He held and still holds the chair, the Andrew Jackson Chair in American History, emeritus now. But the idea of Blackett holding the Andy Jackson Chair has always been kind of, irony makes the world go around. So there's another example. His books are many, and I just want to run through a few of them. The first was in 1983, Building an Anti-Slavery Wall, Black Americans and the Atlantic Abolitionist World. This was the early 80s. And people still were wondering, could we really get at the lives of Black abolitionists? Did they leave enough sources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? This was the time of the collecting of the Black Abolitionist Papers Project, which was a major editing project that made some of this work possible, although you were doing it already. He then did a book called Beating Against the Barriers, which was biographical essays on 19th century African Americans. That came out also in the 80s. Those were short, he's been a biographer almost since the beginning. Those were short biographies of mostly Black abolitionists, some post-war figures in the 19th century. And I think you had considered doing Ward for that, but at that point, you weren't sure, there were too many mysteries. Yeah. You couldn't wrap it up. So you've come full circle. Then he did a book, amazing book on Thomas Morris Chester, who was the Black newspaper correspondent during the American Civil War. People had quoted Chester before, but nobody had ever written his life. Then my favorite of all Richard's books, and he's had two books that have changed a field, and not many historians can say they've had one. Well, around here, of course, everybody says they have at least one. But the book Divided Hearts, Britain and the American Civil War, is the finest work anyone's ever done on how the British debated, fought over, struggled over the meaning of the American Civil War. It's still the best book anyone's ever done on that subject, the way the Civil War played in England. He edited the narrative of William and Ellen Craft, about whom there's a whole new biography out now. And last but not least, maybe his greatest book is The Captive's Quest for Freedom, which came out in 2018, which is, I think, the finest book we've ever had on the whole fugitive slave experience, crisis, both as a legal crisis in the wake of the Fugitive Slave Act and as a lived experience. He mined the newspapers and deep legal sources of the whole border state region to get at this always a bit elusive story of, so who were the fugitive slaves? How many were there? Where'd they come from? Where'd they go? That book gets as close to answering those questions as anything ever has. Along the way, Richard has been editor of the Journal of American History during his years at Indiana, or maybe you were interim editor or something. You were editor. When I first encountered the JH, he was one of their editors. Maybe that's how I got published. Yeah, maybe not. He's also been Harmsworth Professor at Oxford, which is a big deal there at Oxford. In fact, we happened to be in England that same year, which was cool. He was the Harmsworth at Oxford, and I had the Pitt professorship at Cambridge, and we did a couple of gigs together, including several actually, but we did one up in Glasgow, where we did a dog and I must have done some Douglass, and you must have done everything else. I don't even know what we did, but in Glasgow, where James McCune Smith took 3 degrees at the University of Glasgow in the 1830s, there's now a cafe named the James McCune Smith Cafe. And after we did our dog and pony show, 20 people or more from the Glasgow History Department all went halfway across town to the James McCune Smith Cafe, and we had drinks, and they even have sandwiches there named for essays written by James McCune Smith. I mean, you know, well, Anna Mae is here today, Anna Mae Duane, who's written a lot about James McCune Smith. But even getting people in New York to remember James McCune Smith is a little hard. In Glasgow, they have a cafe named for him. How cool is that? And last point here, we also did a gig that year in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, where our old friend, Catherine Clinton, invited us to have a debate. And today we're not going to reenact any kind of debate, I promise. Although, boy, that would have been fun. I don't know what the question would have been, or would be. But we were asked to debate in front of 250 to 300 students and faculty at Queen's University in Belfast, which has a history of conflict, you might know. The question, who freed the slaves in America? Lincoln or the slaves themselves? And we drew straws. He drew the slaves themselves. I drew Lincoln. And at first we thought, this is the stupidest thing we've ever done. Why are we doing this? This is ridiculous. Until you get up on that stage and there's 300 people there. And so we just went at it. And then we went at it for an hour. We just went at it. We tried out everything we could remember or invent. And then they had the audience at the end vote. Yeah. He won by about 5 votes.
1 vote.
Oh, 1 vote? I thought it was 5. Yeah, well, he won. But then he leaned over, and forgive me if any of you heard me tell this story. He leaned over with the mics were still on. He said, "Sorry, mate, I played the race card on you." And I said something like, "You sure as hell did." And anyway, so I relish any chance to interview, talk to, private or public, this guy, because he's been one of my models in this profession for about as long as I've claimed to be a historian. So Richard, welcome and congratulations on Samuel Ringgold Ward. So if we might, let's begin by just informing the world. Who is Samuel Ringgold Ward? This guy born out on the Eastern Shore. We think we know the right county in the northern part of the Eastern Shore. His family escapes when he's but an infant. I mean, his beginnings are dramatic and remarkable. And he becomes one of the most prominent, for a while, eloquent, brilliant, of all of the Black abolitionists, and then somewhat fades into history. But you've managed to uncover this life as much as anyone ever could. So who is he? Start with, who is Samuel Ringgold Ward, and why you chose, when I called you when we started this, I said, Richard's the first person I called to try to coax into this series. And I said, so who do you want to do? He said, let me think on it. Maybe Pennington, maybe Garnett, maybe, I don't know. You didn't take too long. He said, I want to do Ward. I said, fine. Why?
Why did I want to do Ward?
Yeah, it's a way of telling us who he is.
Coronavirus.
Okay.
It made us do strange things. No, Ward had been simmering in the back of my mind for the longest while. As you mentioned, I had planned to include him in that book of biographical essays back in the dark days of the 1980s, and dropped him because the book was already too long, and I had too many problems pinning him down. I just couldn't pin him down. There were too many gaps in his life. And as you know, biographers hate gaps. Chronology they like, gaps they detest. So
Chronology can be our friend or our enemy.
Yes. But so I decided, I mean, since the 1980s, as you mentioned, there have been these collections of documents on Black abolitionists that helped me considerably. as I was working on this one. But Ward has always fascinated me, partly because we know so little about him, but because what we do know, it was clear that he was, among his contemporaries, he was considered a brilliant man, a man who is born in slavery. And one of the things that struck me as I started doing this, I discovered that Ward didn't know he was a slave until he was 24.
Yeah, he finds out he's living as a fugitive slave.
Yes, his mother didn't tell him, his mother told his wife.
Mm.
Now, if I had the skills, I could have made something of that. I sat back when I read that and said, what the hell does this mean? What is going on in somebody's mind who finds out that he was born a slave?
Mm.
And under the laws of the country, he is still a slave.
Mm-hmm.
And he is just at that moment, he discovered his mother was visiting from New York City to his first congregation in way upstate New York.
Right.
You know, where summer comes in one day in July or something like that. And that's his first house.
Mm-hmm.
That's his first home. He's bought this house.
Mm-hmm.
He is beginning to feel that he is somebody. He is the head of a white congregation.
In fact, he feels safer there than he had in New York, because he had experienced these big riots. And anyway, go ahead.
So he is the pastor of a white congregation, which is unheard of in 19th century America. And then his mother drops this news on him. What he never tells us how he reacts. Which I find very curious. So I combed his autobiography looking for clues, but I could find absolutely none. And he never met, and in going through all the transcripts of his lectures, I think he mentioned it once or twice. Once he mentioned it in Ireland to say that the owner of his grandmother was an Irishman called Martin, which is some help. I mean, Martin Irish. So I didn't know. His middle name is weird.
Yeah, 2 G's, Ringgold.
There's a town in Georgia called Ringgold. Where are my Georgia people in here? There's a town in Georgia called Ringgold. One of the principal players during the Revolutionary War in that part of America was called, his name was Ringgold. But there's absolutely no connection that I could pull off. So there's strange things from the very beginning about Ward that piqued my interest, but I knew, and one of the things I learned very early in this business, if you can't explain it, just ignore it.
You're not one of those, what's that term, Ed? Creative confabulation? No. Critical fabulation?
No.
You don't do that.
I gave a lecture 3 weeks ago on Ward in England to American studies people. And, they reach beyond evidence to find explanations. And I can't do that. And I refused to do it. And they said, but Richard, why don't you?
You're being nice about that.
Yeah, why don't you? One woman said to me, but you could have taken photographs of Ward and analyze the differences. And I say, lady, there are only 2 extant photographs of Ward. I can't do anything with 2 photographs of Ward. So the point is, there are things I decided when I started writing this, that what I can explain, I will explain, and what I can't explain, I would simply leave it there on the floor, because I am a firm believer that good historians are like bad mechanics. When after they fix your car, there are lots of pieces on the floor that they know belong in the car, but they can't put it back. So you just leave it where it is. And let somebody else come after you and pick it up.
Well, that's actually so true in biography. Even if you have a lot of sources, which I did on this guy Douglass, there are things you know, and there are things you just don't know, and you have to decide what to do.
Yes,
you got a lot of things you don't know, but you do. Okay, let's go to the 40s.
Okay.
When he's born in 1817, we know that.
Yes, Eastern Shore, Maryland.
Eastern Shore, probably up in that northern part, right?
Mhm.
On the Delaware border. His family escapes into New York, or New Jersey first.
Southern New Jersey.
Southern,
first,
the
yes.
Pine Lands.
Barrens, yes.
In Jersey. So he grows up among this group of, there's some Quakers living there.
Yes, it's an area that's dominated by Quakers.
Right, which is.
And there are 2 or 3 black settlements there in the area.
So it's somewhat secure.
But it's vulnerable to slaveholders. That's what triggers them
far
to leave.
away, right? Yeah. And they leave and go north. Pick it up there because he ends up in New York at this famous school that, again, Anna Mae Duane has written a book about, called the African Free Schools, with an amazing array of men like Alexander Crummell and others who all were there. It's essentially the same moment.
Yes, yes.
And he gets quite a good early education.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, it's an amazing school for the people it produces. I don't think the one history that we have of the school, of the person who was the headmaster of the school,
Andrews.
Yes, he was a colonizationist.
Right.
But the point is that they did the sort of mix of things of classical education plus training people for practical work. And that became very important, and it produced a list of graduates who are impressive by any measure.
They're a who's who of black leaders.
And those people who nowadays are running about losing their mind over diversity and things like that should take a look at the people that this school produced and ask themselves, why is it possible that in 1820s and 1830s New York, where there was all kind of racial discrimination, schools could produce people like this who, in spite of all that they have done, still weren't admitted into the society.
Right.
So that these are people who have to struggle on the edges of society. I mean, James McEwen Smith had more degrees than a compass. I mean,
by getting out of the United States.
But he comes back and he's still operating on the fringes and writing increasingly bizarre essays about race mixing. Crummell decides to pack it in. He goes to Liberia for 30 odd years of his life before he returns. William Howard Day becomes the first Black person to be elected to the presidency of a board of education in America in the 1890s. Garnett. These were incredible people. And yet the society did not admit them in spite of all that they did. So we have that strange, I ask people when they start this nonsense about diversity to please go back and look at these things and then explain to me why at a time when of such horror and oppression, people manage to do things, and yet you're still worried about including people into your system, while you are prattling on about equality and all sort of vaunted principles. So that school, I think, is its accomplishment just by the people that they produce.
So what comes out of there?
That? But it's a school in the midst of madness.
Yeah.
Because Ward comes of age when there's this riot, this abolitionist riot in New York City.
Yeah. Early 1830s. We're in the 1830s.
And he is a teenager.
Yeah.
And he gets involved in it.
Right.
And he is arrested rather than the people who are doing the rioting.
Right. It's his first arrest.
Yes. I think it's put in a dungeon.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. He will have other arrests.
Yes. So it's a baptism of fire, so to speak, and I am convinced that that's at that point that he decides that this is a system that has to go, and that he's going to be involved as much as he can in changing it, and getting rid of it. And he then proceeds to supplement the education he gets there through his own work and through tutors.
Yeah, he seeks out tutors.
Yes.
Frederick Douglass did that too.
Yeah.
He kept looking for people who could educate him.
And then he becomes he becomes a minister.
Right.
And this is, I suppose, he's not a trained minister. He doesn't go to any seminary because there would be no seminary who accepted him, because Cromwell couldn't be accepted into the Episcopalian seminary. That's one of the reasons why he went to Oxford instead of the New York Seminary, or Cambridge. So Ward is confronted by this barrier that he is determined to surmount.
Right.
And one of the ironies is, like, there's part of the folklore where I come from, and it's also, I say, part of Black America, Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby.
Yeah.
And that is the image that I have of Ward. The more he punched, is the deeper he became mired in this thing. It just would not allow him to express himself fully as a Black person in American society.
And over time, we need to stay in the 30s and 40s, but over time, he's going to become deeply embittered about this American system, to the point that he can't stay.
Well, he tries to leave in 1838.
Right.
Because his tutor refuses to let him participate in the literary society that he helped to form.
Right.
And he said he was given up and he was going to go to Trinidad. So he started writing off to people in Trinidad to go to Trinidad. And that's one of the other ironies of Ward. He has this kind of emotional attachment to the farm and the land.
Yeah, if he could just get a good farm.
But he can't do it. That's not him. No. He doesn't have dirt under his nails.
He needs a lectern.
He doesn't have dirt under his nails. So that although he is enamored by it, I mean, his father, he talks rapturously of his father teaching him how to grow things in the farm in New Jersey. He talks about his farm in Toronto, the land that he's cultivated, but he can't do it.
So he pastors a church in Poughkeepsie for a while, then goes to upstate New York.
No, he wasn't. Yes, he was a minister. He was a teacher in Poughkeepsie.
He is a teacher. Yeah, that's right. He opens his own school.
Yes,
right. Yeah, he tries everything. And you're right. He's not formally ordained.
No.
But he's such a good preacher.
Yes.
Even in his 20s, he's just so good in the pulpit. In this little, what's that town in upstate called? Cortland or Court?
No, that is the second one. The first one was South Butler.
South Butler, that's right.
Yes, you know.
A town of 300 people, and a white church invites him to take over their church. It's just.
Yes, and
that doesn't ultimately work out, but it did for a while.
Well, he stayed there, but it's not enough to keep the wolves from the door. I mean, that is his problem throughout his entire life. Whatever he did, he could never make enough money to survive.
It's the central.
He should have become a professor.
And it's a central thread of your book.
Yes.
This man's debt.
Yes.
He can never make ends meet. He's going to end up with 5 children. 3 survive, I think, right?
1, 2, 3, yes.
3.
2 daughters and a son.
His enduring wife, Emily, who is hard to get at too.
Yeah, because she doesn't show, she only shows up at moments of crisis.
Yeah. But she travels with him on the road. I found that interesting.
A couple of times, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Okay. He goes a couple of times because he says she is his yardstick, she tells him. She lays it out. She tells him what to do and how he should do it.
Yeah.
But he also implies that she helps him stop being tempted, which I find to be a curious and interesting. He doesn't always say it, but it's there at the edges. If she is with me, and of course, when she wasn't with him, when he was in Jamaica by himself, he got himself in all kind of trouble.
Yeah.
So he's a good Christian man who is open, who can be tempted.
Okay, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, bring us back to this 1840s moment. I mean, Ward becomes, even though he's in a small town pulpit, he cannot resist. He is just constantly now out on the road as a lecturer. Sometimes he's getting paid, sometimes he's not. His lecture tours rival Douglass's in terms of the unbelievable backbreaking. You have statistics, you have itineraries for some of these. You have statistics. He gives 10 lectures in 12 days. He gives 13 lectures in 18 days, and on and on and on, about slavery, about abolitionism.
And about Negro hate,
that's his favorite subject, what he calls Negro hate.
Discrimination in the northern states.
And he does it with I don't know, you explain it. It's an eloquence that is so powerful. It's almost like a embittered eloquence.
Well, it's an eloquence that caught people's attention wherever he went. And people in describing Ward's eloquence can't help but use 2 paragraphs to explain it. They can't say he was a very eloquent man. That doesn't do it.
No.
They have to go into great detail about his use of classical imagery, about his sense of humor, about his satire, his biting wit. They go on and on and on. And the other thing that caught people's attention is how big the man was.
He's a huge man.
And how black he was.
Right, very dark. Everyone comments on that.
Yes, anywhere he went.
And he uses it too.
Right, and he loved to tell Douglass that he wasn't quite as black as he should be.
A lot of people did.
But it was always a gentle poke, you know. I look for moments, because Ward had such a sharp tongue, and was not averse to belittling people he didn't agree with. But with Douglass, he never did. They had their disagreements, but it was always within certain bounds that it never got out of control.
And a little late, we haven't gotten to when he goes to Canada and then to Britain, but when Ward goes to Britain and says he's not coming back, Douglass begged him over and over to come back. We need you. Come back. We need you. Douglass understood how good he was on the circuit. But take us back there to when, he becomes a political abolitionist.
Yes.
He gets very involved in the Liberty Party.
Yes.
Well, he was created.
Yes, he was never, although he didn't dislike them, he was never partial to the Garrisonians.
No.
He believed that the Constitution.
And they let him know it as they did others.
He believed that the Constitution was the best option available to people to abolish slavery. And therefore one had to become involved in politics and the life of the country. And you can't be a Whig or a Democrat and black, Ward would say, because you can't participate in political parties that have slaveholders in them. But for the majority of black people, there were what were their options? Right. If you don't vote Whig, you can't vote for the Democrats. And there's a message for some of us today. So what do you do? So for Ward, it is the Liberty Party. And those blacks who do not.
Which was founded in 1840 and kind of limps along in the 1840s as this alternative, sort of radical anti-slavery political party.
Yes, it believed that you had to come out from the racist political parties, pro-slavery parties, and you had to come out from pro-slavery churches. Right? So those were the 2 pillars of this drive to cleanse the country of slavery. But Ward could not, or he would not understand people who didn't go quite as far as he did with this. So the blacks, particularly those in New York City who continued to vote for the Whig Party, he savaged them.
He did. He was never afraid to tell his own people what they should do.
Yes. And then the irony of it is that in one instance, before he moved to Canada, he lectured to a segregated audience in Philadelphia.
Right.
And he got pummeled, as you can expect. People said, "Oh, Mr. Ward, ye of clean face and pure understanding, how could you segregate?" And Ward came up with some half-baked explanation and excuse of why it is he did it.
Didn't he need the money?
But that is always there's this sense that look, the man is an editor and a publisher of a newspaper.
Yeah, like Douglass, he creates his own paper.
Yeah, people are subscribing to his paper, but not sending him their subscription. So how do you survive?
True of most abolitionist papers.
He said he pleads with people all the time, and so it's some sad pleading too. He says, please send me a subscription. I'm struggling over here. I have to go on the road in order to raise money to keep the paper going.
It's called The Impartial Citizen.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But he does keep it going for quite a long time.
Yes. But he ends up in court as a debtor. He ends up in debtor court. And that
he's prosecuted for debt.
Yeah. And the magistrates, I think I worked it out that what the judge did was say, look, pay back a certain portion of it, but you have to do it within a certain time. So that's why he went off on that extensive Western tour into Michigan and Western Pennsylvania.
In the dead of winter.
Yes. So he's doing the same thing that he was doing all along in order to make money. And then on his way home, he and his wife are reading a newspaper, and there's news of the Christiana
riot.
As it was called.
It's 1851.
Yeah, 1851, a Maryland slaveholder goes into this little town in Pennsylvania, Christiana, trying to recover runaways. And the runaways were waiting for him because they were alerted by...
And armed?
They were armed and waiting and ready. And they said to the slaveholder, I don't think you should do that. And he was adamant that he would retrieve his fugitive slave, and he stormed the house, and as a result, he got shot and he died. And one of his nephews was also injured. And the three people who were accused of doing it set out like on a sort of secondary journey of escape to Canada and passed through Douglass's house.
They went to Rochester to find Frederick Douglass first. Yeah, he got him into Canada.
Right.
So and they gave him his revolver.
Yeah. Yes, they. Yeah.
But that had a big effect on Ward.
Yeah, right? But that was another one of those things when he said, even on his way back home, he was saying they were going to leave and go to Canada. And then, of course, the Jerry Rescue event in Syracuse prompted them to go.
Explain that, because in the wake of that, he has to get it. He pretty much has to go to Canada.
Because by this time, there are rumors that the government...
They're going to arrest him.
Yes, yes.
Jerry McKin... Well, he has a different last name.
Yes, but we could call him Jerry Fred.
Okay. It's the rescue of a fugitive slave in Syracuse, and Ward was at the heart of it.
Well, Ward was on the way back to home.
I thought he was involved.
No, he got involved.
Right,
in fact, he visited Jerry, and he has this wonderful comparison.
That's right.
He has this wonderful comparison between the riots that they are planning and the riots that he experienced as a kid in New York.
Right.
He said they were different. This is a different kind of riot. This is a good riot.
He says this is our riot.
This is an explainable riot. But the government is not having it. Keep in mind that by this time, there are all kind of other rescues of fugitive slaves. So all
51, 52, 53.
Yes. So all Millard Fillmore, one of our better presidents. All Millard Fillmore is keen to make an example of somebody. And this seems like he and Daniel Webster, who people said, who always, blacks were fond of describing Daniel Webster's the color of his skin.
Yeah.
He was sort of dark skinned, and they made fun of it, whether or not he could be. They said he's darker than many slaves I know, is basically, and therefore he should watch out, because some police may go after him as being a fugitive. And Ward made fun of that too. I mean, he loved that possibility. But by 1851 and his participation there, it's clear that he had to go.
But they break Jerry McHenry out of jail.
Yes,
and spared him to Canada.
But that wasn't the first one.
No, not at all.
People had done
but
that
in the wake of that, Ward decides, I can't stay here anymore. I'll be arrested. So again, his family and kids, off they go.
Yeah.
And now to Canada.
And he has this wonderful opening section of the autobiography in which he talks about going to Canada. And he writes to Douglass and say, Fred, you have America and all its madness. It has nothing, no attraction for me anymore. I am done with America. It is a slave-ridden, racist society. I am not going to do any. You have it, and you deal with it. Of course, he couldn't separate himself totally from it because all the fugitive slaves are coming into Canada at this point.
He stays in Canada about 2 years, 2 years.
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
And he goes to England.
Yeah, he goes as the agent of the Canadian Anti-Slavery Society.
Canadian Anti-Slavery
to raise money
and
to work among
lecturing all over England.
All over. He did in England what he did in New York State.
Yeah.
He went everywhere, and
he experienced what Douglass and Cromwell and many others had, a much muted. If he encountered racism, it was nothing like what he had encountered in the U.S.
Listen, he was very close to Gerrit Smith in upstate New York. And Peterborough was described as the most abolitionized town in the world.
Right.
Everybody is saying the churches were, as the little kids were into anti-slavery. But when he goes to London, he experiences things that he had not encountered before. Like, for instance, the Congregationalist minister Sherman invited him to stay in his house. So he, Harriet Beecher Stowe and Harriet Beecher Stowe's brother are living in the same house.
Right. And
this blows Ward's mind. He say, I didn't ask. And this man says, stay as long as you want. So the English experiences as
he thought about staying a long time.
Yes. The English experience, as I said much earlier on, is a liberating experience for many people because it frees them up to think about an alternative to what their experiences in America.
And then I forget who encourages him, but people all but beg him to write his autobiography.
Yeah, and he does it.
He does it in a hotel room.
In a hotel room without notes, and he does it in a matter of months. 400 pages. So every time people complain about how graduate students complain about how hard it is to write their dissertation, I say, sit down, let me tell you a story about a black guy in the 19th century who sat in a hotel
I promise.
And wrote a book of 400 pages and handed it to his publisher without notes, from memory.
Can you talk about that text a little bit? Because it's always been there. Everybody, it's a great source on Ward. It's a slave narrative, but it's
not a slave narrative.
It's different than
it's
quite different than the genre of slave.
Yes, because it's really about the work of a free black. I mean, and you could say that Ward is a free black man by this point. Yeah. He acts as if he is. So it is what a free black person is doing in the fight against slavery and what he calls Negro hate. And it is an interesting biography because I took what I thought were highlights in the autobiography and tested it out with the records that we have available. And by and large, he was correct. He gives an account of that speech that he gave at the Jerry Rescue.
Yeah. Oh.
And then I tested it from the reports in the newspaper, and it was almost identical. And he had no notes. Well, that's what he tells us. He has no notes. Sometimes I begin to think that Ward is pulling one on me here. But because
you think he went to England with pockets full of notes?
He has no
trunk.
No. There's no reason to believe that he was pulling a fast one on him. It's just he had a power of recall that is quite incredible.
Can you get at this point before we get into Jamaica?
How do you go to this sounds like the Beatles interview, right? How did you get to America? You say, I turned right at Puerto Rico. So that's what Ward did.
Well, okay, but before, can you give us your, because this is in the book. You say you only dealt with what you had good sources for, and that's true. But honestly, I think you do capture a personality here. Would you give us a sense of this personality? This is a, at times, correct me where I'm wrong, and then you take it. At times he seems like almost a desperate man. He's always running from his debtors. He's always in trouble with money. He never has enough money. Emily, his wife, God, how did she endure this? Those children, 2 of them die in infancy, which is common in the 19th century. And he wants to reshape America at the same time he loathes it. And hence his various escapes from it. But I think there's a personality here that you are capturing. How would you characterize it?
But I think that's a pretty good description of it.
No.
I think it is.
No,
you should have written the book.
No. I'm a reader. Not a writer.
I think you got him. He's a man who.
But that anger. God.
Yes, he's a man who is, and the anger simmers.
Yeah.
And it comes out at times when against people that it shouldn't. Against his own people at times who he thinks is not doing what they should be doing. I mean, his description, his response to Black ministers borders on, it is so full of disappointment and anger and disgust. And Douglass talks about this too, right? Black ministers who whip up people's emotions rather than make them think. And he and Douglass were always angry at ministers who didn't make their congregation think.
Black and white.
Yes. And so he reserved some of his nastiest barbs against people who should have been his allies and should have been his colleagues, and who he thought betrayed them. Betrayed his people and themselves in doing it the way they were doing it. But the poverty thing is real. The poverty is real because here's a man who did everything, as I think I've mentioned, who did everything America asked him to do in order to be accepted in the society, and yet he can't make ends meet. Be damned, whatever he does, he cannot make ends meet.
Even when they go to Canada, he thinks, well, if I can just get a farm.
Yes, well, that's
Just
when
be a farmer.
that's getting nostalgia, yes, for the land.
He wasn't going to really ever be a farmer.
No, and if you look at the money, I tried to look at this wherever I could find it. The amount of money he was paid for accommodation, for travel, the percentage that he had to return to the people in Canada, and what he was paid to his lectures. I mean, I don't know how he survived. I don't know how he survived.
He kept borrowing money.
And that's what he did. And you borrow it and it gets deep, and you get deeper in debt. And people like Gerald Smith would lend him money, but that was another thing. He thought that Gerald Smith lent Douglass more money than he lent him.
I think he did, according to what you said.
Yes, and that didn't go down too well with Ward.
Well, Garrett Smith was loaning, they didn't loan anybody anything, he gave it to them.
Yes.
Garrett Smith was bankrolling a lot of abolitionists, especially Black abolitionists. But Douglass had some people helping him.
Yeah, well,
and
Douglass,
I got the sense Ward just didn't have any network of.
Yes, and Douglass had a line of money that kept coming across the Atlantic.
He had British fundraisers,
and Ward didn't have that.
Right.
And to some extent, Ward and Douglass saw their enterprise as being based on the support of their own people.
Yeah.
And in Ward's case, the people betrayed him. They didn't give him, they said, they took out subscriptions. And then they wouldn't send the money. And he ends one editorial with 2 words that really I try to come to grips with, but again, if I was in literary studies, I'd be able to make something of it. He said, "It's hard." And I thought, whoa.
You end a section with that.
Yeah,
it's very poignant.
He said, "It's hard."
This is hard.
And you say, well,
it could have been your title.
It's hard.
I don't know. Your editors might have had something to say about that.
That's the title of my book on Bob Marley.
Wait till he gets that one out.
Yeah.
We'll have a party, not a talk.
Yeah.
All right, but he goes to Jamaica here, and his wife is still in Canada, the poor woman, who is begging him to come back. He says no.
He can't come back because he owes this man money that he borrows money from.
Running away from people he owes money to.
Yeah. He arrives in Jamaica with this.
Somebody gave him land?
Yes. Yeah. An English Quaker gave him, he says, because at the latter stage of his visit to England, he became involved in the free produce movement.
Right.
With Anna Richardson up in Newcastle and other places. And the free produce movement, as you know, argues that if you could produce goods by free labor, you would undermine the need for a slave system. And it could compete with slave-grown produce and undermine it ultimately. So the idea was that Ward, given his stature and and how well he was known, could attract Black Americans to go to Jamaica and produce goods in Jamaica, agricultural goods that could then be sold in Canada and other places and in the United States and ultimately undermine slavery. Now, it's a very far-fetched. The Garrisonians had some choice words for people who were free produce people. But that assumes that Ward was willing to go and spend his time on the land in Jamaica. And I don't think he did. He never went to the land. We don't know. I mean, he seemed to have settled in Kingston as soon as he arrived.
But that latter part of his life really does become hard to find.
Yes. And because he is sitting there, and look, he becomes the head of a Baptist church. He's a Congregationalist minister. I suppose you could move freely between denominations. I mean, I don't know.
Depends on which century you're.
Yeah, I mean, you could move. But he becomes, and the Baptists in Jamaica are a strange group of people. Look, the largest Baptist church in the world in the 1850s is in Kingston. It is a monster of a church. But there are three strains of Baptists. There are those who are attached to the synod in England. There are those who are attached to a breakaway synod in Jamaica. And then there are what are called the native Baptists. Those are people who have developed, who have infused their religious beliefs with a lot of African traditions. And those are the ones who are going to drive the Moran Bay Rebellion that I talk about in the bit. And Ward becomes involved with two of those groups in the periphery, and he becomes a minister to one of the churches that breaks away. And in that position, he, sitting in Kingston, far away from his wife in Toronto, temptation gets him.
Go ahead.
This is when sex comes into the story. I am a firm believer that you should not avoid it when you can. One of his congregants accuses him of philandering. That's not the word the guy used, but what is incredible is that the guy makes this accusation. Ward gets up on his high horse and says, "This is not acceptable. You are maligning me," and he makes the terrible error of suing the guy. And in suing the guy, he gives him a platform to repeat the accusation and to have it in court records. And what is if this person is to believe, and the judge believed him, this guy must have been trailing, or he had some group of people trailing Ward, because the descriptions in the court records are so graphic and so detailed that he must have known when Ward was kissing the woman on which bed and which house and which plantation. I mean, it really is amazing document. You want to know how I found the document?
Oh, yeah.
No,
Whiz.
I wrote a friend an old friend at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica and said to him, where can I go and find documents? COVID has shut us down. I can't go to Jamaica.
Yeah.
And there was
and they gave you a deadline at Yale Press.
Yes, and there was an English guy who was teaching, you would know, who was teaching at the University of the West Indies, who had just retired. And he was one of these people who worked in court records as though this was his
Holy
life.
Grail, yeah.
And he was one of those people who used computers
Before anyone else.
Before any of us did. We were still on the old cards and pieces of paper. So I wrote him. He was now while in his retirement in somewhere in the south of France, and he promptly wrote me back and gave me all the references to the documents. And I wrote off the Jamaican archives and asked them if they could send it to you, and then they did. And that's where it is. It is there in graphic detail.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what the courthouse the scene would have been. You could write a play about this. And then when at the end of the Moran Bay Rebellion, when the British sent a commission to inquire into the cause of the thing, Ward was one of the principal. Not one of the principal, he's one of the people who testified at the Moran Bay Rebellion Commission, and the two abolitionists on the commission committee went after him. Are you the Mr. Ward? Was the opening sentence, and that really got Ward hackles up. He says, yes, I am. Are you the person who escaped from slavery and then went, and that's where it started. And then, were you the person who was accused by one of your... So all of this came out, and what it did is that it simply removed Ward as a legitimate testimony in the proceedings of the commission. But so it's not only did he have to repeat it in court, it came up again later on after the rebellion was crushed. So I came to the conclusion that it did happen. I mean, I can't refute all that court testimony, and to some extent, I suspect it because he was there on his own, and he was a minister. I hope there are no ministers on it. In the congregation. You know, we professors don't fall to such temptations of the flesh.
So he dies in Jamaica.
Yes, yes, but we don't know when or and where in Jamaica he died. Yeah, we don't know what became of his family who were there with Emily or his son Ringgold. We don't know what happened.
The son, that's right. There's a son named Ringgold.
Yes, the son is called.
And did you get anybody into some census records on Ringgold or anything?
But they don't do. They only do aggregate census in the colonies. So it's not. Okay. It's not. The census isn't. Yeah. No name, so it's not enumerated.
Now your research is incredible for this book. I'm not suggesting you.
My other stuff
should have done this or done that, but it's an epic and tragic life, and particularly in the way it ends, in so many places. And yet, you know, I'm not saying we should remember this word or that word or this word or that word, but some of those brilliant editorials that he writes in the 40s, and then some of the speeches that we had.
The speeches
was his powerful. He had a Douglass voice, and Douglass
said,
maybe above all, said it. He said, Ward is our best voice.
Yes, yes. And James McEwen Smith has a wonderful comment. He said he's the best person on his feet.
Yeah. On his feet.
On his feet.
Orators.
And
King Smith would know because he wasn't that great of an orator. He's a brilliant writer, but he wasn't a great orator.
yes, but there's that meeting in New York City in 1851 where he and Douglass confront these local democratic politicians who are taking over the meeting.
It's an Irish mob.
Yes. And Douglass gets up to speak in defense of the anti-slave Garrison, who is sitting there in the hall in defense of it. And the person Reinders, who is a piece of work, says to Douglass that you're not a real Negro. He didn't use Negro. He said, and Douglass says, yes, but that only makes me your brother because my father is white. I mean, so that was Douglass's put down. But then somebody suggested that Ward might
be the real Negro.
Right, be the real. And so Ward gets up and just savages them.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he goes into classic, he quotes from Dickens, he quotes from, I mean, he just blows them out. And in the end, Reinders said, yeah, that's the real deal. But he had this gift of putting people down, but doing it sometimes in a humorous way, and other times not so humorous.
Well, I want to turn this over to questions, and Richard, we're grateful for this book, and you're going to all want to have to buy it here and read it. You can read it
in fact, they won't let you out the door.
We have questions coming from the live stream as well, I think. But yes, Adi, you go first. Well, no, he's going to answer it though.
Yeah, let's see what I mean. Okay, so we have Ward and Douglass have newspapers and having trouble with the subscribers. So the implication has sort of been that, these people the subscribers should have done better. But in David's book, he has the prophet. He has John Brown, right? I think a letter or something that we might not have the money to afford Fred's paper.
Oh, yeah, the newspaper, right.
And so so what I'm asking is, would people have signed up in all earnestness and simply not been able to afford to keep up with
Yeah.
And sometimes, well, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely correct. I mean, these are not rich people that are signing up for this, but
they're as poor as Ward is.
Yes, in Ward's view, this is a commitment to the struggle. And this is one of the means by which we have to struggle against the system. And all it takes is for you. There were also groups of people in Ward's case who, wives of friends who came together and had little groups that tried to raise money to help Ward newspaper. And there, I thought your question was going to lead into why would you have two newspapers less than 50 miles away as the crow flies? But they didn't see. I see no evidence. You may have found it that they saw themselves as competing against one another. They saw themselves as complementing one another.
Yeah, and black papers came and went and came and went. I don't think Douglass saw Ward as the rival that Revelry had, say, with Delaney later, or Garnett or others. But there were times when there were some subscribers would order the paper, and then 8 other families in the neighborhood or community would read that one paper. Yeah. The hope being that at least one of them would pay for it. So a lot more people read it than paid for it. I know that's the case in Douglass. Yes, Tom.
Yeah, did you say Ward was not much of a speechman, an orator, or was he captivating?
Oh yes.
I'm just so he shared a lot of the same kind of background as Douglass, and I mean, what just mean, beyond everything else, what is preventing him from kind of, I don't even know, aside from racism
Yes.
and everything else, but, you know, what's the luck or whatever that gives Douglass a platform and leaves Ward without a platform?
Well, they both have platforms. The difference is that Ward couldn't get the money to keep the platform working. I mean, Douglass starts off with a purse of money that friends from England have sent him.
About $4,000.
And it's a considerable amount of money in the 1850s. And then he has friends who are coming over and helping him to publish the newspaper. And within
one in particular.
Yes. Who, and this is when I knew Douglass had some skills that I didn't appreciate much early on. If you could persuade your wife to have the woman living in your house with you, then that's a powerful man.
She was his editor.
There you are. He was his editor. I'm waiting to see the biography of Anna Douglass. I see she's on the list.
Exactly.
I am going to wait to see a different interpretation from Blight's Douglass. So no,
Dinah Barry is doing a biography of Anna Murray Douglass.
So I think that's the difference. Really is Douglass has had a group of people around him who were willing to continue outside of the United States to continue to subscribe to the newspaper. Listen, there are Southern slaveholders who are quoting, and I found this out in doing the book on fugitive slaves, who are quoting from these English people who continue to keep sending money to the United States to undermine, as they see it, to undermine the government of the United States, to destroy slavery. So Douglass has a source of support that Ward never had. And Gerald Smith would give him some money, but it was usually a small amount of money.
Douglass would get $100 at a pop usually, and Ward wasn't getting
25.
Yeah. Douglass also was broke half the time, and his paper would have gone under if it weren't for Julia Griffiths constantly writing to Garrett Smith. And he didn't have a Julia Griffiths. Ward needed a Julia Griffiths. We have some great questions from out on the streaming, if I could go to this for a moment, but hold your questions too. Afua Cooper from Canada.
Afua, hello.
Yeah. Thanks for this great talk. Could you say more about his time in Ontario, which we kind of skirted through, and with folks like Henry Bibb and others in the, among the Canadian circle of abolitionists? What did he do those couple of years in Canada?
Yeah, most of his life in Canada is devoted to his work among
Canadian anti-slavery.
Right.
Society, yeah.
Working for the Canadian Anti-Slavery, or the Anti-Slavery Society of Canada, I think was its official name. But doing the same sorts of things that he was doing when he was in the United States. But he, as in the United States, he ran afoul of certain people, certain groups of people who were attempting to build up agricultural, to acquire land, like Bibb and others that Afua has written about.
They're trying to build colonies.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Ward thought that was begging. And he didn't like beggars, although he was a very proficient beggar himself. He didn't like people going around, particularly white abolitionists, some of with whom he worked in the Liberty Party, that were going around raising money for this enterprises in Canada, and Ward just laid into them. He said this was just nonsense. This is not what should be doing, because Ward was firmly committed to the idea that the enslaved, given the right opportunity, or the freedman, given the right opportunity, could do for themselves. And these beggars, these people who were going around begging old clothes and money for the fugitive slaves in Canada, were not doing them a service. They were doing them a disservice.
Ward was a tough character
Yes.
to deal with. I mean, that
Yes.
comes through in your book. Our friend and colleague Manisha Sinha is watching, and hello, Manisha. Great historian of abolitionism, for in case any of you don't know. Richard, can you explain more Ward's reaction to the Morant Bay Rebellion? His inspirations seem so similar to Pennington's, James Pennington, yet his life in the end is so different than Pennington's, who also dies in obscurity. That's true. I just wrote about him in the Yale and Slavery Project. But in service to freed people, I am currently writing about Pennington's sense of abolitionist mission in Jamaica in the 1840s and then later during Reconstruction. How do you explain their different trajectories?
Wow.
Yeah, that's big.
That's a couple chapters there. Ward's position on the eve of the Morant Bay Rebellion. And another element comes into this, and I try to deal with it in the book, is that Ward thinks that the Morant Bay Rebellion is a contrivance led by a mulatto. And that is the first time you see Ward.
Really?
It's a bitterness that you wouldn't have, that there's nowhere in his life before.
He doesn't do that in the 40s.
No,
and 50s.
he doesn't do it with Douglas. He doesn't do it. But in this case, William Gordon, who is executed for his involvement in the Morant Bay Rebellion, is the son of a slaveholder who becomes very prominent in Jamaica, a very powerful man. He is in the legislature, and he is adamantly opposed to the governor. He thinks that the governor is an incompetent, and he's only there because he is an Englishman, and he shouldn't be there, and they should throw him out, he says in the legislature. And Ward develops a deep dislike of Gordon. And the only evidence I could see to explain it is that Ward mentions somewhere that Gordon had slighted them when they met in London.
Yeah, that's all over your book. Ward didn't handle slights very well.
And you don't slight Ward. So that may explain it. But Ward, throughout in the weeks and months leading up to the rebellion, kept saying to the landless, look, and the peasants, look, this economy depends on you. It cannot thrive without you. It doesn't depend on those landowners who are squandering their money in their big homes in England, not them. It doesn't depend on the merchants in Kingston, not them. It is your work and the creation of the alternative economy that you have developed since emancipation, on which the future of Jamaica relies. Do not squander it. Be patient, he kept saying to them, which is a strange word to hear from Ward. Be patient. But he had an idea that the future of the island depended on the little people who cultivated the island. And in that sense, he is not a gung-ho sort of pro-colonial, but that's how it comes out in the end, because he thinks that that Gordon has led the people astray and led them into a rebellion that they can't win. And as it turned out, in that sense, he was right. But the governor created such horrendous crimes in the wake of the rebellion. The execution of people, they took Gordon and Paul Bogle and hung them without a trial. They burned peasants' houses. And yet Ward stuck with the governor. And that in the end, that is the one thing I cannot explain. I do not understand it.
Didn't Gordon identify with the Native Baptists?
Gordon was, yes, he identified with the Native Baptists.
And what about Ward?
Ward did not.
That was Ed Ruggamer asking about whether Ward identified with the Native Baptists.
Yes.
Just so people know.
Yes.
That might have been a distinct,
No, but Ward thinks that was a ploy on Gordon's part to lead the people astray. That's how Ward saw it. Bogle is a native Baptist, it's clear. And Ward finds himself caught in that uncomfortable middle ground where he makes two speeches at a big meeting, at big meetings, one in Moran Bay outside of the very courthouse where the riot started. And it's clear that the people who are opposed to Gordon and the developments that are taking place see Ward as the one person who could stop the rot. He could stop this thing from happening. If so, and he believes that he could. So he makes the speech in Moran Bay in which he says, be patient. Be patient. This country this country is yours, and you are the backbone of the country, and it cannot survive without you. And by that time, everything it's out of his control. It's out of anybody's control.
What a trajectory. He's telling, in effect, the peasant population of Jamaica to be patient. He couldn't have said that to his fellow Black Americans in 1850.
No, because
be patient with the Fugitive Slave Act.
Because the difference is that they're a majority of the population.
Right.
They're a majority.
Right.
The economy depends on him. Sugarcane is down in the gutter. I mean, it is economically collapsing. The peasants have created an alternative market economy in Jamaica. This is impressive by the 1860s. They're selling stuff in their own markets. They're selling stuff outside of Jamaica. And he's saying, hold on, you got it. This is yours.
I got an amazing array of questions here online. I'm going to get to one or two more, and from some remarkable scholars far and wide. But in the room, please, who else? Yes, sir.
I'm curious about Ward's genealogy, both ancestry and progeny. It did sound in your conversation that it kind of did it in a way we didn't really learn much about what happened after he passed. But has that been explored? Is that explorable?
Thanks.
Well, I tried.
It's about Ward's genealogy and ancestry.
Yeah, I tried. Ward doesn't provide as much evidence of his ancestors. I mean, besides that one reference that he makes in Ireland that his mother's grandmother was owned by an Irishman, enslaved. He does talk a little bit about his mother, who clearly was the dominant woman, the dominant partner in the marriage. She was older, she was bigger, and obviously took no nonsense. I mean, that comes across in the autobiography, but he doesn't say it that way, but that's one is left with that impression. But he doesn't go into the background of his family at all. And at the end, we don't know what happens to we know that his wife was there when he died. We think as one of his daughters was there who was helping him run the school that he ran towards the end of his life, and his son was there. But then everything just...
He spends the entire American Civil War in Jamaica.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it's just...
Yes. Which, of course, is another impact for the Moran Bay Rebellion, because prices go up, because all the commodities are now... All the food stuff in Jamaica is imported. It's a wonderful... Colonialism is a strange business. Folks are importing all their food from the United States, basic foodstuffs, and that all those go up in the war.
Yeah.
So people are hurting.
Kevin.
One of the things that really stood out in your book, especially the chapter on finding his own voice, when he was finding his own voice, was he's pointing out a lot of the hypocrisy in some of the organizations, Sons of Temperance.
Oh, yeah.
Big party. But my favorite term he used that I feel like is applicable to today, not to just ministers, but to professors as well, is
this is he's talking about you.
Emeriti too.
He talked about the golden bribe.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I wanted your take on just, his views, and we touched on it in terms of the, ministerial community within his own community.
Yeah, well, it's golden bribe is one of the nicest things he had said about it. I mean, but people who take money, but they take money and then they vote to the people who give them the money, and this is what Ward is harping on, and folks are countering him by saying, "But Sam, what alternatives do we have? Do we vote for the Liberty Party? It's a disaster. It got swamped in 1840. It got swamped in the presidential election of 1844.
It elected one member of Congress.
Yes. Nothing is happening, except, of course, that I mean, one of the things that I didn't play up in the book because I don't know what it really means, is that Ward was named vice presidential candidate of the Liberty Party.
Yeah,
Must be before Kamal.
he was the VP candidate before Douglass was supposedly the VP candidate 30 years later.
Yeah,
on the women's rights ticket.
Kamala, yes. So he was the Kamala Harris of the 1840s. But
You got a couple hundred votes. Huh?
Ward, those folks there were some strongholds of Black Whiggery in New York City, in Rhode Island, and there were all those people, at least in Ward's mind, were part and parcel of the group that was being funded by rich Whigs to get them to vote. And the Whig Party always betrayed them, is what Ward would argue. They came out, they promised to help fight against the voting restrictions in New York to get it changed, and in the last minute, they changed their mind. And for Ward, that was a sin. I mean, his condemnation of Martin Van Buren in 1840 is devastated. And people
who's the Free Soil presidential candidate.
Yeah, and he said
Ward won't go there.
But are you serious? You're going to vote for this man? Here's what he hasn't done. And he goes and he itemizes all the things. And he provides an alternative political manifesto that I think is absolutely brilliant for its time.
Including the $250 property requirement for Black men to vote in New York, which will never get rescinded until the Civil War.
So he's very scathing about, he sees that as the bribe. He sees that as a bribe. And to some extent, I think he's absolutely correct.
I'm going to go online just for one more, maybe. Jerome Handler.
Oh, no, not Jerome.
Yeah. But he's asking about how Jamaicans viewed Ward. I think you've already kind of dealt with that. Yeah. Thanks, Jerome. Amy Godine. I'm interested in Ward's interest in Black agrarianism. He may never have farmed, but he allied himself with several Black farming initiatives, from Garrett Smith's Adirondack venture, which was a big deal, to Stephen Meyer's Florence colony, and then his farm never worked, as you suggest. He never worked farm really in Jamaica either. Did he have interest in sort of what she's calling Black agrarianism? Yeah, well, the Black agrarianism, that Ward is only involved peripherally with Jarek Smith's land distribution that he gave. 1 million acres in upstate New York, and he started giving it away. Yeah, he started partly so they could help people qualify to vote. But that was partly the reason behind it. But Ward is one of many people who are involved on the periphery acting as agents of Smith. But it's never. It's not as serious as far as Ward is concerned. He doesn't go out of his way to say much about it at all. The only time it comes up in any serious way is when he has a dispute with Jermaine Logan
when they
In
were in
Syracuse.
Canada,
Or-
over who was doing what to whom and who was being more helpful to Black people getting the land. And so we know very little about his involvement in that.
Is there one more question within the room before we wrap up and go sip something and eat something? I just want to say finally, and you can respond. No one has given us access to this world of Black abolitionism per se, like Richard has in all these many books, and this time now through a deep dive into a single life. As you were saying earlier, the African Free School group, they're an incredible generation of brilliant young men who all do something different. Well, some of them become ministers. I mean, Carmel becomes probably the greatest Black theologian of the 19th century.
Influenced Du Bois when he comes back.
Indeed. And Yale's about to give him an posthumous honorary degree because he spent a year here trying to study at the divinity school, and others, many others. But there was a time when we thought we never could get fully at the lives of these people. There really was a time, believe it or not. And now we do. And it is an amazing generation of people fighting against something they weren't at all sure they'd ever live to see defeated. And of course, Douglass ends up seeing a victory, if you like, for his cause in the middle of his life. And he and Ward are almost exactly the same age.
Yep. But Douglass also saw the retreat.
Exactly. Douglass lives long enough to see the betrayal and retreat and worse. Ward, because he goes into exile twice over, three times over, Canada, Britain, Jamaica, and then dies much earlier than Douglass did, does not experience, feel that triumph the way some African-American leaders could have claimed. Comment on that a little bit, if you would, that just the trajectory of Ward's life. Now, there are all sorts of reasons it ended up in that trajectory, but he is an example of this amazing generation that still most Americans don't know enough about.
Well, one of the things that I wrestled with, and I don't think I got an answer for posing the question to myself, is what does exile mean? Not enforced exile, but in Ward's case, it's partly enforced, but also it was a decision that he took to leave the United States. And he tried to do it on a number of occasions. Yeah. He tried in 1838, he tried in 1842, he tried again. And then, of course, he went to Canada in 1851. So for Ward, America didn't hold on for him, it didn't hold on the promise. I mean, it had potential, but which it refuses to fulfill. And for Ward, then exile becomes the logical solution for him personally. But for us looking back on a life of exile, I've always been struck by the fact that people who leave the United States walk off the pages of American history. They just disappear. They are no longer Americans. There's not a single obituary of Ward in any newspaper that you could find. The only reminiscences we have of Ward is Douglass and James McEwen Smith.
And that's earlier.
And that's earlier. But Ward, I mean, Douglass comes late in his life. I mean, that is in the 1890s.
He does remember Ward.
Yes, from the 1890s, right, looking back. So that is amazing. Yeah. No black newspaper, no all abolitionists. You can't find anybody talking about Ward. It's as though he just vanished into thin air. And how do you explain that? And that is the But what's his name? Oh dear, how could I forget his name? He wrote an introduction to Ward's autobiography that was published by the Johnson publication folks in
we'll get a drink later and we'll remember.
There's a river. There's a river. Who wrote it?
Vincent Harding. Vincent Harding, right.
And it's an eloquent, but it doesn't, in its eloquence, it leaves you frustrated.
Yeah.
He talks about Ward disappearing into the hills of Jamaica, and you have visions of Ward going up, doing something else and disappearing into the hills of Jamaica. I mean, some of us tried to disappear into the hills of Jamaica and successfully in our youth, but Ward, you know, it's an image that I played with, and I said, I know I can't, I have to leave it alone. It is beautifully written.
Doesn't Harding even comment on his darkness, his blackness?
Yeah, well, everybody talked about Ward's blackness and his size. His blackness, size, and eloquence comes up all the time. You can't describe Ward without talking about those three things. I mean, I remembered Ward in his visit to, while he was in England, he went to Wales. And the Welsh blew him away. He thought that they were the most brilliant people, except this holding on to this weird language. They should just drop it, he said. It really doesn't serve them very any purpose. But Ward, all 16 stone of him, walked up Mount Snowdon. I don't know if anybody has attempted to do that. That is not easy to do. And then he got back down at the mountain and he got on a horse or a carriage or something and went off 90 miles to give a lecture. So he's a man of enormous energy, but he pays a physical price.
A lot of health trouble, a lot of health.
He pays a physical price for doing it.
He had the Douglas throat disease.
Yeah, but that's because he talked too much.
Well, no, really, always having throat problems.
Yeah. And then they all were running around trying to get water cures.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know.
Where did he go for the water cures?
Yeah, there were a number of them in upstate New York.
That's
that was the center of water cures.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
I'm sure we could still find some nowadays. We should do that, you know, it might help us.
Hey, sounds good to me right now.
We should do.
Well, please, I don't want this to end. I want to keep talking to Richard, but I can keep doing that. So please join me in thanking Richard Blackett for this amazing work. And thank you all out there online for your questions and for attending and watching. And there are some refreshments at the rear here. And I'm sure Richard will still answer one or two more questions if you have.
Only if I with a glass in my hand.
Glass of something. All right. This has been a very special event for Yale Press as well as for Richard.
We should thank Seth and others for putting up with me.
Well, I don't know. You got yours done on time, I'm told. I mean, he produces.
Well, I surprised him. I know. He said,
okay.
Are you finished already?
Yeah. Well. This guy is a producer. I've learned that. You know, I sent him one chapter of my Douglass biography to read. And he said, "Send me 3 or 4 more." Okay, be careful what you. And then he sends me something to read, and 5 months later, I'm still trying to find time to read it. It's not right. It's not fair. Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and please join us for refreshments. And thanks to Michelle and Melissa who helped, and Daniel. Where are you, Daniel? Back here who produced all this and made it all happen. Thank you.